Okay, thanks for the cable. So we can now get started. In our talk now, which is called Rebellious Communication, it is about a situation where media and government cause information blackout. And if that happens, it is up for internet activists and rebels to provide the news for the people. Our speaker today will provide his first-hand experience regarding this situation in post-Katrina New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. Please welcome Bicycle Mark.
I had a New Orleans-style jazz brass band because I need that kind of atmosphere to get me going. Good evening, everyone. Clearly, I'm not talking about packets or anything as sexy as all your favorite topics at the CCC. But I'm glad to see that you came because I think part of this event is not only having fun and learning about toys and well, what I consider toys, maybe you consider tools. It's also about the world around us and how it works, and taking a closer look perhaps behind how it works, right? Because we want to make a better world. That's what I want to do. My name is, on the internet, I'm known as Bicycle Mark. People call me that in real life too. It's perhaps a strange name for someone who considers himself a journalist, but I'm quite used to it. I do a podcast now called citizenreporter.org. Formerly, or many people still know it as Bicycle Mark's Communique or Bicycle Mark's podcast. Whatever you call it, doesn't matter. It's about what I do that I find is more important, and that is reporting on issues that aren't on the front page of your major media, and that I believe belong there. And the I is where the podcasting comes in, of course, because I believe blogging, podcasting, video blogging, it starts from the individual. It could be a group of individuals, but it starts from the individual. And I had this experience, and I'm here to talk about it, but I'm not only going to talk about my experience, I'm also going to talk about what other people are doing, because there are people that are far more important than I am. I was just one of those people who drops in, looks around, enjoys the food, meets people, and then leaves, and now I'm here. There are people who live this situation every day, and they're far more important, and I'm going to talk about them as well. I know in the past I've probably joked around a lot, but this is one of these things that I don't think is funny. So I'm trying to remember not to have too much fun with this. So you're all going to be very sad when you leave here, but perhaps you'll be angry, which is something that I think is also important, to be angry. Let's see how it goes. I titled it Rebellious Communication and the Federal Flood. There's two parts to that. There's the rebellious communication, and there's the federal flood. First of all, rebellious communication. As I said, all those things I said about blogging, a rebellious communicator to me is someone who doesn't adhere to the status quo. The status quo is what the mainstream believes, what you see in the lowest common denominator of society. So in the case of Katrina, or what we should say is New Orleans today, there is a status quo belief in the United States that they're rebuilding. It's not easy, it's not going well, there's some crazy people down there, but they're rebuilding. So, and we sent some money. Everybody believes the American government, sent some money. And if you accept the status quo, then you believe this is true. And it sounds good. So you would want to believe that your government was helping, sending money, doing their job, repairing. The problem is, first of all, a lot of that isn't true. And that is why I say a rebellious communicator doesn't just accept the story the way it is. You look behind it. My other criteria, of course, is that you don't work for a traditional channel. I was just talking to a friend of mine. She's in Sierra Leone, and she's very interested in what happened and what's happening in New Orleans. And it's funny because she's in Sierra Leone. I'm interested in what's happening in Sierra Leone. But the two actually have a lot in common. Corruption, overall. Blatant corruption. And when I say people who don't work for traditional channels, I'm talking about a group of individuals, including myself to some extent, I don't work for any large media. I am my own media. And we all know about blogging. Probably half of us are bloggers or were. And it's all about not having to work for anybody larger. So that's one of my criteria for rebellious communicators. There's also, you have to openly have a stake in what happens. That's an expression. Have a stake in something means basically your future is involved. The same is true in alternative news. The difference between a journalist who works for a large organization and goes to New Orleans and does some stories, and a person who lives there, who reports about his neighborhood, and depending on what happens in the future, he could lose, or she could lose his or her home. So you have a stake in it. Your future hangs in the balance of what you do. And likewise, you might not only just report, you might actually go and do and put yourself in a situation. So a simple example, I'll come back to it later, the bloggers of New Orleans have physically gone out as a group of bloggers and rebuilt houses. I mean, that's the style of rebellious communicators I'm talking about. I just wanted to explain these little points of the type of person I'm talking about. Now, I don't qualify as all of these. I feel myself here today as more the storyteller. I'm here to tell you a series of stories. Some of them are my own, and some of them are other people's. And we'll just go from there. So I've talked about, I'm going to talk about some bloggers. I myself am a blogger, I'm a podcaster, I'm a video blogger. It's all part of being your own media. It's just whatever your preference is. The other type of person that you have involved in this situation is activists, of course. It's people who care about what happens, who are working perhaps as relief workers to rebuild the city. That includes people who came from outside, like me, who just went to New Orleans and decided this was important. That's basically what happened to me. I decided it was important from day one after the storm. And of course, independent experts. I mean, the beauty of the internet, just like we have a lot of independent experts in here in certain areas, we can have bloggers. We have, for example, engineers. Engineers are very important in this whole discussion of what happened to the city and what's happening to the city. Because engineers are what, among other people, government of course involved, but they were part of the equation in building levees, right? So we have independent engineers who don't work for the government, who blog, who watch, who report, who do their own research. Yeah, it's not their full-time job, but they do it with a passion because they're concerned about their city, or they're just concerned as humans. Probably the same reason you guys are in here right now. They're concerned as humans. I do want to mention, the title also says Rebellious Communications and Federal Flood. I want to talk about the federal flood part in a moment. A couple of factors that we probably already know, but I want to make sure are laid down. The reason that bloggers, and I want to separate the bloggers in New Orleans, or the bloggers about New Orleans, from other bloggers. Plenty of cities have bloggers, right? And there's all kinds of topics. But New Orleans is different because in terms of priorities, there's one very serious priority going on. And that is, will we have a city in the future? Or is this all going to be gone? And this is actually a question that still lingers. Are we going to have a city? Because it hasn't been decided. Or at least the people with the power to make it so, they haven't shown that it's going to happen. And I'll show you some evidence of exactly what I'm talking about. It's important to note that the internet has, of course, been an important medium throughout. Even on the days of the storm, we had people, I think Jacob is around here somewhere, I know he did a lot of things during that time. People were publishing what was going on outside their window as waters were rising, as things were just going bad. And of course, immediately after, you had citywide Wi-Fi, which made a big difference for people to be able to publish, especially when utilities were very irregular, and they still are in New Orleans. Well, now they're irregularly priced. So this is important. I want to mention this. These are factors that helped the people do what they do, the bloggers do what they do. And like I mentioned, there are people with direct experience in all this. There were people blogging about their neighborhood, how the lights haven't gone back on, or the street light doesn't work. These are very simple things, but this is how it begins. And then there are people who happen to work in the city municipal building, And they report about things they hear in the hallway. Now, they don't report under their own name. You know, they're the bicycle marks of the world, although it's not a very secretive name, but there are more secretive names that they go under. And they can report about perhaps things going on in the workplace that they know affect things that are happening in the city, why things are happening. And of course, the last ingredient, I mentioned anger. The great part about a good New Orleans blogger, although it's not always necessary, but is anger. People are angry about what's happening because it doesn't have to be this way, right? And I'll get more into that in a second. I use the term federal flood. This was something I learned. I didn't know this. I went to New Orleans and I said, oh, so this is Katrina recovery. Hurricane Katrina almost destroyed us, and now we're repairing it. And they said, no, we don't call it Hurricane Katrina. We call it the federal flood. Because it's a flood that was made possible by the federal government. One of the tuba players from the Hot 8 brass band, a very simple quote that says it all. He said, if they knew it could happen, and he's such a calm guy, you know, he says, if they knew it could happen and they didn't do something about it, then it's almost like they let it happen. And then he's really just confused. Who would let this happen? But of course, as people who look behind the information, we could ask who benefits from what's happening. And that's something I keep in mind when I read and learn about all this, and I think you would too. So it wasn't the water alone that destroyed the city. It was poor planning, almost to the point of you wonder why it was so poorly planned, when they knew that this could happen, when they knew what could happen to the city if a storm that would hit eventually would occur. And that's part of the reason we call it the federal flood. There was no investment or attention, or not sufficient attention given to the levees, to global warming, or to the plan of where will people go and how will people come back, which we still don't know how people will come back. More on that in a moment. I call it the brutally negligent and disingenuous relief plans starting the day after the storm until today. I mean, I'll just let that statement stand and I'll move forward. I want to go over just these 4 areas, and out of all of them, the only one I didn't visit actually was a hospital. I did not set foot in a hospital. I don't know if it was fear or simply I was pretty busy. But my experience and what I've been reading extensively through the power of New Orleans bloggers and vloggers is issues of housing and property, issues of prisons, issues of schools and hospitals, and infrastructure. And I'll just go right into them. Because each of these areas are in major crisis and are not getting a whole lot of reporting, especially on a national scene. But even on the local scene, you know, a journalist is overwhelmed in that city because there's so much going wrong. So what's going wrong? A lot of people are asking there and here, why haven't people gone home? So I rented a car and I drove the streets like any good tourist in the lower 9th Ward, in the 9th Ward, in Orleans Parish, all over. And the one thing I saw was that there were no people. You know, I drove this, I snapped these shots, and I kept expecting people to, well, not wave. I didn't think they would wave. I thought they would just give me dirty looks for being a tourist. And there were no people. Homes, the doors were, if they weren't boarded up, more often they were just simply open. Windows were open. And it wasn't because it was a beautiful day. It was because there was nothing in the house anymore, or at least nothing of value. Occasionally I would see someone pushing a little cart, collecting spare things from somebody's house and just moving along. People have not come home. And so people ask, why haven't people come home? Remember that when they finally got things going, the city government, with support of, you know, state government, sent people away. They sent them to places where they could stay temporarily. So Houston was a popular one, but not only, Baton Rouge in the north. But people were sent as far as California, and I met someone who insists he has relatives that got taken to Alaska. And he was not happy about it because that family is now